Eleonora was a princess, but she wasn't like the other princesses of her people. She wasn't soft, nor was she sheltered. She was a warrior, born into a race known for their strength and battle skills. Her people, the Valorans, had a long history of fighting and conquering, believed power and strength were everything, and Eleonora had proven herself to be one of their strongest leaders. But deep inside, she wanted more. She wanted peace. Her people's hunger for war had been all she knew for so long. Yet something about the constant battles left her feeling empty. She had grown tired of the endless fighting, the endless bloodshed. She wanted to know if there could be a different way to live, one without the sound of weapons clashing or the fear of death hanging over her head. Her chance for peace came. When the galaxy was in a state of tension, the Valoran Empire had a mission to help stabilize the galaxy, and Eleonora was chosen to represent her people on this mission. It was during this mission that she met Ryan. Ryan was different from anyone Eleonora had ever met. He was a human, not from any of the great empires or powerful armies of the galaxy. Instead, he was part of a small peacekeeping unit, sent to work with the Valorans to help maintain order and peace across different planets. Ryan wasn't loud, nor was he boisterous. He wasn't the type of person who commanded attention. In fact, most of the time he was quiet. It was his silence that intrigued Eleonora the most, unlike most humans. Ryan had no interest in the grand displays of power or wealth that Eleonora had seen so many times in her life. His world was simpler. He did his job, and he did it well, without ever asking for more. He seemed like someone who wanted to be left alone, yet his presence was undeniable. His calmness was a contrast to the loud, boastful warriors Eleonora was used to. At first, Eleonora thought little of Ryan. He was just another soldier. But as they spent more time together, she began to notice how different he was. He never tried to impress anyone, and he didn't seem to care much about status or titles. He wasn't like the other soldiers who always seemed eager to show off their power. Ryan wasn't afraid to show kindness, and his actions were always thoughtful. Eleonora found herself drawn to his calm demeanor, and slowly she began to look forward to their conversations. One evening, after a long day of negotiations and meetings, Eleonora found herself in the palace gardens, looking out at the stars. It had been a peaceful moment, and yet she felt lonely. She missed her family and the home she had left behind. As she walked among the flowers, she spotted Ryan standing quietly by a fountain. He had a way of blending into the background, but at the same time, Eleonora felt like he was always there, watching over things. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Eleonora said, walking up to him. Ryan nodded but didn't say anything. His silence was not uncomfortable, though. Instead, it felt like he was giving her the space to speak, if she wished. "I used to dream of a life away from all of this," Eleonora continued. "A life without war and constant fighting. I thought it was impossible, but now I'm starting to think it might be." Ryan turned to face her, and for the first time, Eleonora saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "we're so caught up in fighting that we forget there's more to life. Peace isn't easy, but it's worth trying for." Eleonora was surprised by his words. They were simple, but they struck her deeply. In that moment, she saw a side of Ryan that no one else seemed to notice. A man who had known hardship, who had fought battles, but who also longed for something more. She wondered how he had ended up in this position, far from his home, working alongside a fierce Valoran princess like herself. Over time, their relationship grew. It started with small talks, then progressed to deeper conversations about life, war, and the future. Ryan never asked anything of her, never tried to push her into anything. He was patient, something Eleonora had not expected from a human, and she began to admire that about him. One day, while the two were walking through the palace, Eleonora turned to Ryan and said, "I never thought I would marry anyone, especially not a human. But there's something about you. You're different. From everyone I've known, you make me believe that peace is possible. You've shown me that there's more to life than just strength." Ryan's face softened. "I never thought I'd marry anyone from a powerful empire like yours," he said, "but maybe we're both searching for something we can't find on our own. Maybe we're meant to find it together." That was the moment Eleanor realized that she had fallen in love with Ryan. He wasn't the strongest warrior. He didn't have the power of her people's armies behind him. But his strength came from something deeper, something more enduring. It was his quiet resolve, his patience, and his ability to see the world differently. Their love blossomed, and Eleanor found herself making a decision she had never imagined. She would marry Ryan. She knew that it would be a shock to her people, that they would question her choice. But in her heart, she knew it was the right decision. As their wedding day approached, Eleanor couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and fear. She had no idea what the future would bring, but for the first time in her life, she was ready to find out. With Ryan by her side, she believed that anything was possible. Together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Eleanor had never imagined that she would find herself standing before a crowd, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and nerves. It's preparing to marry someone so different from herself. She was used to being the center of attention after all. She was a princess, a warrior, and a leader of her people. Yet, as she stood at the altar, ready to marry Ryan, the quiet human soldier, it felt like the world had become a different place. The palace hall was filled with the finest Valoran nobles, soldiers, and dignitaries. The room shimmered with grand decorations, banners of gold and silver hanging from the walls, and the sound of ceremonial music echoing through the air. Eleanor's royal gown sparkled with gemstones, a symbol of her status. But there was something about the way Ryan stood there, wearing simple armor, made her feel more at peace than anything else in the room. Ryan had not asked for any special treatment. He had declined the lavish garments and jewels that Eleanor's people offered him. He was content in his armor, the one he had worn during their time together. It wasn't a symbol of wealth or power, but a symbol of the life he had chosen. Eleanor admired him even more for this. She glanced at Ryan, and for a moment it felt like the whole world disappeared around them. His eyes met hers with a calm warmth, and in that moment, all her worries melted away. She was not marrying a powerful warrior or a noble with great riches. She was marrying the man who had shown her that true strength was not always seen in battle. The ceremony began. Eleanor's father, the king of Valora, stood before them, his regal presence looming over the crowd. His eyes were filled with both pride and concern. He had been the one to arrange this marriage to strengthen their empire's alliances with the human peacekeeping forces. But now, as he saw his daughter about to wed a human, a soldier no less, he couldn't help but wonder if this was the right decision. Eleanora, daughter of Valora, do you take this man, Ryan of Earth, to be your husband, to stand with him in both peace and in battle? The king asked, his voice deep and strong. Eleanor looked at Ryan once more, her heart filled with certainty. I do, she replied, her voice unwavering. Ryan's turn came, and as he stood there, facing the princess, his eyes showed no hesitation. He was quiet as always, but his heart spoke louder than words. I do, he said softly, his gaze never leaving Eleanora. The crowd was silent for a moment, as if waiting for something dramatic to happen. But there was no grand speech, no fiery declaration, just two people standing before their world, ready to share their lives together. The king placed a crown on Eleanor's head and a simple band on Ryan's finger. They were not symbols of power, but symbols of unity, of a bond that was beyond titles and wealth. With this, the ceremony was complete. As the crowd erupted in applause, Eleanor and Ryan turned to face each other. Eleanor couldn't help but smile, her heart full. She had never expected to feel this way. Oh, she had spent so much of her life preparing for war, for leadership, that she hadn't realized how much she had longed for peace. And now, she felt as if she had found it with Ryan. They walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. Their marriage would be the subject of much discussion, many questions. Some of Eleanor's people were already whispering about Ryan, wondering if he was truly worthy of the princess's hand. Some believed he was too quiet, too reserved to stand by her side. They couldn't see the depth of his strength. It's a calmness that allowed him to endure challenges without letting the world break him. But Eleanora knew better. She had seen it in his eyes from the moment they met, the the strength that was hidden beneath his calm exterior. She had felt it every time he quietly listened to her, every time he stood by her side when things became difficult. She didn't need a loud warrior to fight her battles. She needed someone who could stand with her. Through it all, someone who could offer her peace when the world around her was in chaos. And Ryan had shown her he was that person. That night, as the stars twinkled above the Valoran palace, Eleonora and Ryan stood outside together, looking out at the horizon. The noise of the celebration inside the palace felt distant, and in this moment, there was only the two of them. "Do you think we're making the right choice?" Eleonora asked softly, breaking the silence. Ryan turned to her, a small, knowing smile on his face. "I think we've already made it. We're here, together. That's all that matters." Eleonora rested her head on his shoulder, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. The path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, battles, and doubts. But in that moment, with Ryan by her side, she felt as though anything was possible. For the first time in her life, Eleonora wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't afraid of what others would think or say. She knew that together they could build something stronger than any empire, something that could change the galaxy. It wouldn't come from war or conquest, but from the quiet strength of two people who had chosen each other as the night wore on. Eleonora and Ryan shared their first quiet moments as husband and wife, standing together under the stars. They didn't need grand speeches. They didn't need the applause of the crowd. All they needed was each other. And in that quiet moment, they both knew that this was only the beginning of their journey. Days turned into weeks after the wedding, and life at the palace became a little more peaceful. Eleonora and Ryan's bond grew stronger with each passing day. Though their people still whispered about their marriage, the couple found comfort in the quiet moments they shared together. In private, Ryan's silence seemed to soothe Eleonora's restless soul, and she began to notice things about him that no one else saw. Ryan was not just a quiet man. He was also a man of great patience and skill. Eleonora often watched him in the mornings as he would leave their chambers before dawn. At first, she had thought it was to avoid the busy schedules that came with royal life. But as days went by, she realized there was more to it than that. One morning, after a particularly long night of meetings and discussions, Eleonora decided to follow Ryan. She slipped out of their chambers and walked quietly through the palace halls, making sure to keep her footsteps soft. She reached the palace garden, where she had seen Ryan disappear earlier, found him standing alone in the training yard. Ryan held a sword in his hand, moving with fluid grace. His movements were slow at first, but there was an underlying strength to each motion. Eleonora stood in the shadows, watching in awe as Ryan practiced. He didn't use a sword like the other warriors she knew. There was no rush, no wasted effort. His style was calm, deliberate, and precise, as though he was in perfect harmony with the weapon in his hands. The sound of the blade slicing through the air was rhythmic and soothing. It was unlike anything Eleonora had ever seen before. Grown up around warriors, men and women who fought with anger, with speed, and with brute strength, right? Ryan fought with something different. There was a quiet power to him that Eleonora couldn't quite explain, and it intrigued her. She stood there for several minutes, just watching him. It was only when the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon that Ryan stopped. He lowered his sword, his breathing steady, and Eleonora stepped forward, her soft footsteps giving her away. Ryan turned quickly, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but it quickly faded. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said quietly, his voice as calm as ever. Eleonora shook her head. "I wasn't sleeping," she replied. "I wanted to see what you were doing out here so early." Ryan's eyes softened, but he didn't say anything. Eleonora looked at the sword in his hand, then back to Ryan's face. "I never knew you could fight like this," she said, a little surprised. Ryan gave her a small, almost embarrassed smile. "I never wanted you to know," he said simply. "When I left Earth, I left behind that life too, but I guess it's still a part of me." Eleonora stepped closer, intrigued by his words. "You left that life behind? Why?" Ryan looked at her, his eyes serious. Because war has a way of taking everything from you. It makes you think that fighting is the only thing that matters. But I realized that there's more to life than just fighting. Lenora studied him for a moment. She had always known that. Ryan was different, but hearing him speak so openly about his past gave her a deeper understanding of who he was. He wasn't just a quiet man. He was a man who had seen the horrors of war and had chosen a different path. One that didn't rely on violence and destruction. I admire your strength, she said softly. You've been through so much, and yet you still stand by me. Never ask for anything in return. Ryan gave her a small smile. I'm just doing what I think is right. Eleonora felt a warmth spread through her chest. She'd always been strong, always relied on her own abilities to protect herself and those she loved. But Ryan's strength wasn't something she could see with her eyes. It was something deeper, something quieter. And that, she realized, was the kind of strength she needed in her life. The two of them stood there in silence for a moment, the sun now fully risen and casting a golden light over the garden. Eleonora didn't feel the need to speak anymore. Ryan had given her the answer she needed without saying much at all. She could see the quiet strength within him now, and it made her admire him even more. As the days went by, Eleonora began to notice more of Ryan's quiet moments. He never seemed to seek attention, never asked for praise or recognition. He did what he believed was right, even when no one was watching. And in those moments, Eleonora saw the true measure of his strength. But not everyone in the palace understood Ryan the way Eleonora did. Some of her advisors still questioned his worthiness, seeing only a soldier who had left his past behind. They couldn't see what she saw. They couldn't see the man who had quietly earned her trust and admiration. One evening, during a grand banquet held in their honor, Eleonora overheard a conversation between two of her advisors. They were talking about Ryan, their voices low and full of skepticism. He's just a soldier, one of them said. What does he know about ruling or leading an empire? The other advisor nodded. He's too quiet. He hides behind that calmness. But how can we trust someone who never speaks up? We need a leader, not a shadow. Eleonora clenched her fists under the table, a sense of anger rising within her. She had worked hard to earn her position as a leader, but Ryan had earned her trust in a way that no one else had. His silence wasn't weakness. It was his strength. She stood up from the table, her chair scraping against the floor.
Oh.
Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by her sudden movement. She faced the advisors, her voice firm. Ryan may not be like all of you, but he is the man I chose to marry. He has proven more than enough to me, she said, her eyes unwavering. His strength is not in his words or his titles, but in his actions, and I trust him with my life. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Lenora turned and walked out of the banquet hall, her heart heavy but resolute. She knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But with Ryan by her side, she felt ready to face whatever challenges came their way. The peaceful days that Eleonora had hoped for were quickly slipping away. Despite their shared quiet moments, the galaxy around them was never still. News of growing unrest and tension among the neighboring planets had spread like wildfire. Valoran Empire, proud and powerful, was facing threats from multiple fronts. And despite Eleonora's wishes for peace, it seemed that war was always knocking at the door. It started with whispers about a powerful enemy fleet that had been sighted near their borders. The threat was real, and the council immediately called for action. Eleonora knew that her people were not ready to face another war, but she also understood that the enemy would not wait. They had to act, and they had to act fast. The palace was filled with the heavy sounds of hurried preparations. Soldiers rushed through the halls, gathering weapons and armor. Officers met with the royal council, discussing strategies and plans. It was the same scene Eleonora had seen too many times in her life. The excitement of battle, the chaos, the fear it, was all coming back. Ryan had been quiet during all of this. Eleonora noticed that he hadn't been training in the garden lately, nor had he been the man who usually spoke with her at night. He was distant, as if something was weighing on him. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Eleonora found herself standing on the balcony, looking out over the palace grounds. The stars were just beginning to appear, and for a moment, she felt like everything might return to the calm she had once longed for. But as soon as Ryan walked onto the balcony beside her, she knew it wasn't meant to be. "Eleonora," Ryan said, his voice calm, but heavy with unspoken words. "The time is coming." Eleonora turned to him, her heart sinking. "I know.
Right.
The fleet is close. We must be ready." Ryan nodded, his eyes dark with thoughts she couldn't quite understand. "I've fought in wars before, Eleonora. I know what it's like to face an enemy who doesn't care about peace. But this time, it's different." Eleonora studied him. "What do you mean?" Ryan hesitated for a moment, his gaze distant. "I've seen the way people prepare for war. It's not just the soldiers who fight, it's everyone. The fear, the anger it spreads. I won't let it consume you. I won't let it consume us." His words, though simple, struck Eleonora deeply. She'd always been prepared for war, but Ryan had seen it from a different perspective. He had seen the toll it took, not just on those who fought, but on everyone around them. Eleonora realized how much she had taken for granted: the strength, the resilience, the ability to stay calm, even in the darkest moments. Ryan's silence wasn't weakness. It was a quiet strength that kept them grounded. "Ryan," she said softly, "I know you're worried, but we have to be strong. We can't let fear stop us." He nodded, but his gaze was still far away, as if he were seeing something she couldn't. "I will protect you, Eleonora. But I need you to understand something." She stepped closer to him, her heart racing with concern. "What is it?" Ryan reached for her hand, holding it firmly. "I am not the same man I was before. I don't want to fight, but if it comes down to it, I will." Eleonora's eyes widened, and for the first time, she saw the man she had married not as a quiet soldier, but as someone ready to face a war he didn't want. She could feel his resolve, his determination to stand by her no matter what came. The next day, the first signs of the enemy fleet arrived. The alarms rang throughout the palace, and soldiers scrambled to their positions. Eleonora rushed to the command center, where she was met by her father and the generals. The news was grim. The enemy was much stronger than they had anticipated. "We need to prepare for a fight," one of the generals said. "We can't afford to wait any longer." Eleonora nodded, her mind already racing with plans. But just as she turned to leave, she caught sight of Ryan, standing at the back of the room. He was silent as always, but there was something different about him. He wasn't just the quiet soldier anymore. He was a protector, ready to do whatever it took to keep them safe. As the battle drew near, Eleonora found herself thinking of Ryan's words. She had always known that war was part of life, but Ryan had opened her eyes to something more. He had shown her that strength didn't always have to be loud and forceful. Sometimes the greatest strength came from within, from the ability to stay calm and centered, even in the face of chaos. The night before the battle, Eleonora and Ryan stood together in the training yard. The palace was quiet, and for the first time in days, they could be alone. Ryan held a sword in his hand, but Eleonora had never seen him with it drawn before. As she watched as he ran his fingers along the hilt, his face serious. "You don't have to do this, Ryan," she said softly. "We can find another way." Ryan shook his head. "There is no other way, Eleonora. This is the only way to protect you, to protect us." Eleonora didn't argue. She knew Ryan was right. Sometimes there was no choice but to fight. Ryan looked at her one last time, his eyes soft but filled with determination. "I will fight for you, Eleonora. Will always fight for you." Eleonora reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. She didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know if they would win or lose. But she knew one thing for certain. Ryan was not just the quiet soldier she had married. He was a warrior, a protector, and he was ready to stand by her side, no matter the cost. And with that, she knew they were ready for whatever came next. The night before the battle, as the stars dotted the sky above the palace, Eleonora sat alone in her chamber, her thoughts swirling like a storm. The quiet moments she had once cherished now seemed like distant memories, replaced by the harsh reality of the war ahead. She knew that the next day could change everything. Either it would mark the beginning of a new era, or it could be the end of everything she had fought for. Ryan had been more distant than usual. Though he had stood by her side during the war preparations, there was a quiet tension between them that she couldn't quite explain. She could see the weight of the coming battle in his eyes, the silent resolve he carried. But something told her that there was more to his story than he had ever shared with her. That evening, she walked through the halls of the palace. Her mind heavy with worry, she found herself at the door of the training yard. Ryan was there again, standing under the soft light of the moon, his sword resting at his side. But this time, he wasn't training. He was simply standing, lost in his thoughts, his face as unreadable as always. Eleonora took a deep breath and approached him, her footsteps soft but purposeful. She didn't speak at first, just watched him as he stared into the distance, the tension in the air thick between them. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "Ryan, why do you keep hiding from me?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with concern. "You've been distant for days now. What's on your mind?" Ryan turned to her slowly, his expression unreadable. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, as if deciding something deep within himself, he lowered his sword and took a step closer. "It's not that I'm hiding from you," said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "It's that I don't want to bring my past into this. I don't want to burden you with it." Eleonora's heart skipped a beat. "Your past?" she asked, her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Ryan took a deep breath, his gaze steady but pained. "I fought wars before, Eleonora. Real wars, not the kind where you hope for peace, but end up in endless battles. I was part of a special forces unit on Earth, highly trained, highly skilled, but I wasn't always the man you see now. I didn't always choose peace." Eleonora felt a chill run down her spine as Ryan's words sank in. She had known he wasn't just any soldier, but hearing him speak of his past, of the man he had been, sent a wave of shock through her. She had always admired Ryan's quiet strength, but now she saw him in a new light, one filled with complexity and depth. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice full of understanding and concern. Ryan closed his eyes, the weight of his past clearly weighing on him. "I was trained for one thing, war. And when the wars on Earth were over, I didn't know how to live without it. I joined a covert military unit, and we were sent on missions that were not always what I thought they were. I was a soldier, a weapon, and I did things I'm not proud of." Eleonora took a step closer to him, her heart aching for him. She reached out and gently touched his arm, a silent gesture of comfort. "Ryan, you don't have to tell me all of this. I don't need to know every detail." But Ryan shook his head, his gaze finally meeting hers. "No, you need to hear it. You need to know why I'm like this, why I left Earth in the first place. I couldn't keep living that life, Eleonora. I had to change. I had to leave it all behind." Eleonora stood in silence for a long moment, her mind racing as she processed his words. She had always known that Ryan was different, but she had never imagined the darkness of his past. But despite the weight of what he had shared, she didn't see him any differently. She still saw the man who had protected her, the man who had shown her a quiet strength that no one else could offer. "I understand," she said softly. "I understand that you've been through things that have shaped you. I also know that you're not that man anymore. You're here with me now. And I love you, Ryan. That's all that matters." Ryan's eyes softened as he looked at her, and for a moment he looked like the man she had fallen in love with, the quiet, strong protector who had always been by her side. But there was still something in his gaze that told her he was not fully at peace with his past. "I wish I could forget everything that happened," Ryan said, his voice almost a whisper. "But I can't. It's always there in the back of my mind. And I fear that one day I'll have to face it again." Eleonora stepped closer, her hand now resting on his chest. "You don't have to face it alone. Not anymore. We're in this together, Ryan. Whatever happens, we'll face it together." For a long moment, they stood there, locked in a quiet understanding. The weight of Ryan's past still hung between them, but Eleonora knew that it didn't define him. What mattered was the man he was now, the man who had chosen her, who had chosen peace and love over the violence of his past. "I won't let you face this alone," she whispered, her voice full of promise. "We'll get through this together." Ryan looked down at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, something raw. He nodded, his lips curling into a small, rare smile. And then, as the stars above them twinkled brightly, they stood together, knowing that the battle ahead would not just be one of swords and strategy. It would be a battle of their hearts, of the past and the future, of love and loyalty. And in that moment, Eleonora was more certain than ever that no matter what happened, they would face it side by side. The day of the battle arrived, and the palace was filled with tension. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the anticipation of what was to come. The enemy fleet had entered Valoran space, and the time to act had come. Eleonora stood at the command center, her heart heavy with the weight of leadership. As the ruler of her people, it was her responsibility to guide them through this crisis. But the thought of facing another war made her stomach twist. Beside her stood Ryan, as quiet as ever. His expression was calm, his face showing no sign of the anxiety that Eleonora felt. Despite the chaos around them, Ryan remained the steady presence she had come to rely on. His calmness was like an anchor, keeping her grounded even in the midst of the storm. "Eleonora, we've prepared as much as we can," one of the generals said, his voice filled with urgency. "The enemy fleet is too large. We need to move quickly." Eleonora nodded, her gaze never leaving the holographic display in front of her. The enemy ships were closing in on their position, and the Valoran fleet was spread thin. She knew they didn't have the luxury of time. The decision weighed heavily on her. Should they fight or try to negotiate for peace? But deep down, Eleonora knew that peace would not come easily. The galaxy was too fractured, too filled with old grudges, to simply give in. She turned to Ryan. "Are you ready?" she asked quietly, her voice betraying the fear she had kept hidden for so long. Ryan looked at her, his eyes soft yet filled with determination. "I'm ready," he said, his voice steady. "I'll fight for you, Eleonora. I'll fight for us." Eleonora felt a surge of gratitude wash over her. She had known that Ryan was strong, but hearing him say those words gave her a sense of peace she hadn't expected. She had always thought of herself as the warrior, the leader. But now she realized that strength came in many forms, not just in battle, but in standing by each other, no matter the cost. With one final glance at Ryan, Eleonora took her place at the front of the command center, her mind focused on the task ahead. The battle began as the ships of the Valoran fleet moved into position. The sound of the battle echoed across the command center. The noise was deafening, but Eleonora kept her focus. She couldn't afford to lose control now. Her people depended on her, and Ryan was out there fighting beside them. Through the communication lines, Eleonora could hear the voices of the soldiers. As they fought bravely against the overwhelming enemy forces, her heart swelled with pride at the courage of her people, but she knew that the fight would not be easy. The enemy was relentless, and the odds were stacked against them. Hours passed, and the battle raged on. Eleonora felt her strength waning, but she refused to give in. She had to stay strong for her people, for Ryan, for the future they had begun to build together. She could hear the sounds of explosions and the cries of her soldiers, but she focused on the task at hand. Meanwhile, Ryan was at the heart of the battle. His sword raised high as he fought with the precision and skill that only a warrior could possess. His quiet nature had always hidden his true strength, but now, in the heat of battle, his power was undeniable. He moved with grace and efficiency, each strike a testament to his years of training, to the man he had been before he had ever come to Valora. Though the battle was fierce, Ryan's presence gave the soldiers around him courage. He didn't fight for glory or recognition. He fought to protect those he loved, to protect Eleonora and the future they had dreamed of together. In the midst of the chaos, Eleonora received a message from one of the generals. "We're holding our ground, but the enemy is relentless. We need more time." Eleonora's heart raced as she heard the urgency in the general's voice. she said, her voice steady. We're not giving up. Not now. She turned to Ryan, who had just returned from the battlefield to report. His armor was battered, but his eyes were filled with resolve. We've held them back for now. But they're regrouping, he said. They won't give up easily. Eleonora nodded. Neither will we. Together they made the decision to lead one final charge. They would push forward and make their stand. Not just as leaders, but as warriors. It was their last chance to end this battle on their terms. With a determined look, Eleonora ordered the fleet to move forward. As the Valoran ships launched their final assault, Eleonora and Ryan stood side by side, their hearts beating in unison. The sound of weapons fire filled the air, but through it all, they remained steady. Ryan's sword was by his side, ready for whatever came next. Eleonora could see the strength in his eyes, the same strength she had fallen in love with. This wasn't the man he had been before. This was a man who had chosen a new path, one that embraced love, peace, and sacrifice. As the enemy fleet began to falter, Eleonora realized that the tide had turned. The Valoran forces had fought with a fierce determination, and now they were on the verge of victory. The enemy, realizing they could not win, began to retreat. Eleonora watched as the last of the enemy ships turned and fled, the battle finally coming to an end. The cost had been high, but the victory was theirs. In the aftermath of the battle, as the smoke cleared and the cries of the fallen echoed in the distance, Eleonora and Ryan stood together, their hands intertwined. They had faced the darkness together, and now they would walk into the light. Eleonora looked at Ryan, her heart filled with gratitude. We did it, she said softly. Ryan nodded, his eyes filled with pride and exhaustion. We did it together. War had ended, but a new chapter in their lives was just beginning. With the enemy defeated and peace finally on the horizon, Eleonora and Ryan knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges, but they were no longer afraid. Together they would face whatever came next, knowing that their love, their strength, and their unity would guide them through anything, and so they stood together ready to build a new future, a future where peace and love would rule, and where strength would be measured not by the weapons they carried, but by the hearts they held.